why I think most of us can perhaps remember that one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt keep holy the Sabbath day. And we know of Jewish brothers and sisters who keep the Sabbath very intentionally to not do any work on that day. The fact is that as Americans living in our society, especially here in Northern Virginia, the concept of Sabbath is really foreign to us. I want you to think about a day you had when you didn't do any work. Maybe you had a day that you just took a mental health day and you thought, I'm going to sit and read my book and I'm going to drink a cup of tea and I'm going to be today. And you don't check your email and you don't check your voicemail and you just kind of go through the day. At the end of the day, refreshed though you might feel, you probably had that moment where you felt guilty. You thought, oh, I didn't do anything. I didn't get anything accomplished today. And that's kind of Sabbath to us, is this idea of a guilty pleasure, being able to take a day off, being able to stop for a day. I admit I don't have those days very often when I unplug from the world. And really, we're called to do it once a week. We're called to do this quite frequently. So we come at the idea of Sabbath and at this passage from the gospel from a different lens, really, than they would have had at the time. Because the Sabbath was essential and important, and it was part of the law, and by golly, you kept the law. So we have this teaching of Jesus. He's in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Interestingly, back in chapter 4, when he teaches in the synagogue and he says the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing, everybody, including his whole family, are like, who do you think you are? By here in chapter 13, they're all amazed by him. So he's teaching in the synagogue. He doesn't go to the synagogue that day heal, it doesn't say. People are bringing their friends and loved ones and coming to Jesus for miracles all over, and they're following him. But it doesn't say. It said he was just teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And this woman came in who was crippled, so much so that she's bent over and has been for 18 years. Think about that. For 18 years to not be able to straighten up, to not be able to look people in the eye, to always see the earth as something down here rather than all around us. One of the hinges on this scripture is when Jesus says, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." He laid his hands on her, and immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. The verb in Greek, stand up straight, is actually a passive verb. It's actually, she was straightened. Work is being done on the Sabbath, but God is doing the work. It doesn't even say that Jesus lifted her up and straightened out her back. He laid hands on her, but she was straightened and began praising God. But this story is not necessarily so much about the miracle. Lots of miracles are going on, but about the context of the Sabbath. And Jesus is going to have more of these encounters about the Sabbath going on in Luke's gospel. And it comes down to a couple of things. One is that he calls them hypocrites. And for good reason. They say, oh, well, my donkey doesn't understand, Sabbath. He needs to drink water today, and I will take him to drink water. And this woman, who is a daughter of Abraham, interestingly, that's the only time in the scriptures that phrase is used to describe this woman, the daughter of Abraham, a woman of the covenant. That Jesus heals her on this Sabbath day instead of the next day. They say, why? Why would you do this? We go to all this effort not to do any work. And if you've ever read the stories about, in neighborhoods in New York, for example, where they have a string that goes around and designates the home of the area because about what you can do at home and what you can do outside on the Sabbath day. Their objection is not to the healing, though we'll see him come in conflict with them over that too, but the conflict is over when he chose to do it. Now, Jesus could very well have chosen the next day. It doesn't say that the woman presented herself for healing that day, that she came for healing. Maybe she did. Maybe she heard of Jesus and wanted to be in his presence. It doesn't say that Jesus went there to heal her. He was just teaching in the synagogue, and there she was. And God straightened her up. Jesus, however, has a sense of forward motion here. Remember back when we started talking about Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem? He is moving forward. He is going on into a new reality, and one that is going to be so dramatically different that he has an urgency about him. It's not simply to teach them a lesson that he heals her on the Sabbath, but that he's going to get all the healing in he can while he can. The Sabbath, this idea of rest, has become to them a purpose in and of itself, rather than a way of getting closer to God and to each other. And you and I are in desperate need of that Sabbath. I have to say that right now, in my life, as in yours, as we're all trying to figure out how we're going to say goodbye and how we're going to move forward in faith and do new things, I have to admit that I have to-do lists that you would not believe. Calendar taped up to the sliding glass door in my kitchen. I have to do this on this day and all of that. But Sabbath. Sabbath isn't something that is a guilty pleasure. It's something we need. We need to be fed. We need to rest. For the people in Jesus' day, and for some people still today, that Sabbath is a particular day. But I want to challenge us to think of Sabbath not as a day, but as Jesus. The Society of St. John the Evangelist, which is an Episcopal monastic community based in Massachusetts, has a meditation every day, a word of the day that they call Brother Give Us a Word. The day's word was follow, but if you Google SSJE, Brother Give Us a Word, it'll take you to their site. So I went on and I said, what have they said about Sabbath? And a monk named Mark Brown wrote, if Jesus is the true Sabbath, the one in whom we find our rest, this Sabbath is not limited to the seventh day, but is always present to us. The problem that the leaders of the temple were having when they say, oh, you shouldn't heal on the Sabbath day, you should save that for the next day, is that they have lost sight of the purpose of Sabbath. And if Jesus is the Sabbath, you and I are tempted to lose sight of the meaning of the Sabbath. And we expect it to happen on one day. So 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, that's Jesus time. That's when Jesus is active and present to us, and we all know that. What if Jesus is just as active in your life at 10 o'clock on Wednesday night? Or at 5 a.m. on Friday morning? What if the Spirit is going to surprise you at an unexpected hour? As we go through this time of transition, I challenge us all, including myself, to remember that this time that we have together here in this church building on one Sunday is not the sum total of Jesus, as Brother Mark said, is the Sabbath and is not limited to the seventh day. Look for Jesus in your life. Look for Jesus at an unexpected hour. Look for Jesus to straighten your back at a time unexpected.